Okay, so could we all take our seats, please? Those of you at the back, I'd really appreciate it if you could move to the front, please. Great. So, ladies and gentlemen of the press, good afternoon. Good to see all of you here. All of you are my colleagues. For those of you who do not know, I've worked in the media for the last 15 years or so. And it's good to see all of you here, having taking part in this very important conversation. So, about 20 world leaders will converge tomorrow with delegates, as long as world leaders as well, just having a conversation about climate change and the effect it has been having on Africa. Kenya is set to host the Africa Climate Summit from tomorrow morning. There's been lots of conversation around it. Basically, a stock take of some sort ahead of COP28. What is this that Africa is going to say when you get to COP28? What is this rallying call that Africa is going to make? And what is at stake for Africa? Why do we even need to have this conversation? That is why we are here. What's at stake for Africa? We have the climate summit in Kenya, fine. But what's at stake? What do we stand to gain? What do we stand to lose? That is the conversation we're having this evening with all of you. Hoping you'll be able to take part in this conversation. I mean, it's very important that we have this conversation. Why? It affects the lives of 1.4 billion people. If we do not talk about this, if we do not address the effects of climate change, we're putting the lives of 1.4 billion people at risk. And that is why this evening, one in partnership with Africa Climate Foundation and the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, are hosting the Africa Climate Summit, Africa's Green Future. What is at stake? So before we begin, I'd like to call upon Eric so that he can explain to us. We all have headphones on our seats, so we understand how it works. Not all of us speak English here. So Opon will explain to you how the headphones work. You understand how to listen to the different languages that are in the system before we begin.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So you have these devices on your seats, and it is configured to 2 channels. For those listening in English, it is channel 1. For those who'd like to listen to this meeting in French, it will be channel 2. If you'll need any help, my colleague Job, who's at the back, who's raised his hand, you just raise your hand and he'll come to you. And I'll repeat the message in French. Mesdames et messieurs, nous avons ces récepteurs ou casques pour l'interprétariat. Vous allez pouvoir suivre l'interprétation en français sur le canal 2 et les anglophones vont suivre sur le canal numéro 1. En cas de toute difficulté technique, nous avons Job qui est au fond de la salle qui va venir vous aider. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, upon Eric. Thank you very much. So let me run you through our program today. It will take about 1.5 hours. From now. So we're going to have a keynote speech. That will take about 20 or 30 minutes or so. Then we'll have a panel discussion with 4 panelists. After that, we will allow you to ask questions to the panelists. Then after that, once we are done, once the panel conversation is done, we will provide access to the panelists so you can have a one-on-one, maybe seek clarification, and then we will be done for the day. So for now, allow me to introduce our keynote speaker who's just walked in. So in August 2022, at the official opening of the Africa Climate Week in Gabon, one speaker said some very interesting things. And allow me to quote, she said, Africa is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, with the Congo Basin forest ecosystem serving as an essential carbon sink and biodiversity hotspot. Biodiversity loss, extreme weather events, and land degradation accompanying climate change are hindering the sustainable development of African countries. And that's why we are here, for the Africa that we want. Those words were said by a lady who's about to give the keynote address this evening. I'm referring to Madam Josepha Leonel Correa Sacco, Africa Union Commissioner in charge of Agriculture, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. Ma'am? Could you give a round of applause, please?
Thank you, Master of the Ceremony, for giving me the floor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will first of all like to thank one campaign for the invitation that was made to me to present a keynote address. As you know, tomorrow we are going to convene our first inaugural Africa Climate Summit. And I'm inviting all of you to come because we are the convener as the African Union Commission. And we know that this agenda, climate agenda, the agenda of environmental agenda, the disaster risk reduction agenda, meteorological agenda, they are very, very important for us at the African Union. That is why during the reform, the African Union really created a directorate just for these matters. We have the directorate that is in charge of blue economy and as well as sustainable environment, where all these thematics that we are going to have in our conversation is really captured in this directorate at the African Union Commission. So thank you once again for giving us really this opportunity to share what we are doing at the African Union Commission. In terms of it, we are really working with our member states, with partners, to see that the issue of climate change should be really tackled, as we are all aware in our continent that we are not polluters. You know, we have less than 4% of responsibility of the emission of the greenhouse gas in terms of a continent that is owned, but we are the most vulnerable on the impact of climate change. If we need to escalate the consequences of the industrial revolutions that the Western country did, so I think that can be another debate that we have to see how can they really keep to their pledge, because they promised us during Paris agreement, they promised us $100 billion annually for us to mitigate and adapt to the impact of climate change. Up to now, we haven't seen anything. Mostly this continent that is the most affected by the impact of climate change, we're having only less than 2% of investment. But our governments are very conscious of that, because we cannot be victim every time. We need to do something. When all this calamity comes, the hazard comes, we cannot just start knocking the door to the Western countries. They are really the ones that polluted more than us. But we want to say that we want to go together. We want to go to this journey, all of us together. We are not the victim. We are the victim, but we are not the cause of this problem, but we really want to build upon the error of technology in the past and come out with our own also, because we have ambition to industrialize our continent. We have a population of 1.4. By 2050, we have 2.5 billion people. So we need to start as leaders. We need to start looking at the initiative, programs, project for this young generation. The young generation. We need to also preserve our planet, because all of us, we depend on the planet. So we need to really take this agenda of climate agenda or environmental agenda very seriously. So I commend our continent. For the first time, we are going to have this summit, and we are really going to identify. We have already have a draft on this Nairobi Declaration, and we really want to address the real issue. So when we are with our fellow partners during the COP 2028, we have to have what we call bankable project, because the green funds, when we go there, they say we don't have bankable project. Now we are coming with a bankable project. At the African Union Commission, we have our own bankable project, because we have three main initiatives that we advance. We have the African climate change and resilient development strategy. We have the Great Green. We have the GRAP, the Green Recovery Action Plan. We have that one, and we have the meteorology strategy. We have those three tools that they are bankable project. So now here what we are going to discuss, it's how can we implement those projects? Because we know that most of the time and most of the scene is not because we don't have the tools. We have the tools, we have the policies in African Union. We do have our member states, they have our the RECs, the Regional Economic Commission, they also have it, but how do we implement? Because we should not be worried about how do we monitor our member states. We need to let them implement. When they implement, we go and monitor evaluation. But if we are just concentrating on studies and all this biannual review report, we are not doing anything. We are not advancing. We have to go to action. And it is very important. That's why this meeting that we are going to have here, in this agenda of climate change, we need to really say this is what we want. When we are sitting with our partners, we say that is what we want. And it has to be a key message. All of us, we have to be, and we are lucky that we are the only organization at the African Union that we have our 55 member states to be member of African Union. It's not so in EU. In European Union, they don't have all the members of Europe to be members of EU. That's why we are seeing what is happening between Ukraine and Russia. But because if they were all inside the platform of EU, I think the solution could have been much faster. The way we do it in African Union, the way we do it in ECOWAS, all these our regional bodies, they are body of African Union. So with this, to share with you what is African Union, what we do, how relevant we are for our continent, because we are the policy makers, we are the umbrella, we federate all the policies in our organization, and we have each department is in charge of some sector. We have 6 because of the reform. Today we have the 6th department, but we cover all the sectors that Africa needs to develop, Africa needs to transform, Africa needs to reduce poverty on the continent. So with this, let me just go to my keynote address. So what I will say, I've already said that despite being the least polluting continent, responsible for less than 4% of the global greenhouse emission, climate change has had a knockout effect on Africa's development and continue to subject more and more Africans into hunger and malnutrition, stunted, and poverty. We cannot accept it to have hunger on our continent because 60% of uncultivated land globally is in Africa. We have the youngest population. We have the aquatic resources. So we don't have a reason to put people in hunger. So we have to change this narrative. We have to really change and really speed out, because all the reports are telling us that we are not moving. So even the partners that are with us, are they really helping us? So let the partners help us in the concrete actions, not coming with study. No. We want really action, and so that we can change this thing. So our economy are also shrinking due to the effect of climate change, and the recovery from the impact of impact of COVID is very low. That's why we have our GRAP, and we want to implement the GRAP so that we can recover very quickly in terms of when we are talking about this sector of environment. And the debt stress has been compounded by the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the unfair international monetary system, which tend to be biased against Africa. We all know that our interest rate is high comparing to other regions of the same developing countries. When we want to go and get loan for the development, our rate is 7%, but gross, the national growth is 2%. So if your national growth is 2%, how can you go and endebt yourself with 7% interest? So those are the type of conversation we have to have with our partners, because we have the right to have access to that funding. It's very important for us. We need, because we have a lot of countries that don't have natural resources. They are very poor, and they need to be helped, mostly in this thematic of climate change, because they are not the cause of it, but they are suffering because of that, and their government cannot even address, tackle these things. Some government, yes, they are putting 2% on their budget for adaptation programs, but others, they cannot do it. They are very poor. And when you look at mostly the islands, Sao Tome, Cape Verde, Seychelles, those countries are really suffering. And I think this is time for us to really be more realistic and address all what is happening in our continent. Therefore, in the wisdom of our head of state and government, they decided for the African Union to convene the meeting that we are going to have tomorrow, an inaugural African Climate Summit. And we are grateful to the government of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency President William Ruto, for gracious offering to host this summit here from the 1st to 6th of September here in Nairobi. The inaugural Africa Climate Summit, championed by His Excellency President Ruto, aimed to address the increasing exposure to climate change and its associated costs, both globally and particularly in Africa. With the expectation of escalating climate crisis in terms of frequency and intensity, urgent action is required to mitigate these challenges. The summit will serve as a platform to inform, frame, and influence commitment, pledges, and outcome, ultimately leading to the development of the Nairobi Declaration. It is organized in parallel with the African Climate Week, one of the 4 regional climate weeks planned this year to build momentum ahead of the UN Climate Change Conference, the COP27, that is going to happen in late November, December in Dubai. This year, in Dubai, and the conclusion of the first global stocktake designed to chart the way of fulfilling, implementing the Paris Agreement key goals. We know the Paris Agreement, and most of the countries, we submitted the NDCs. I think 48 to 49 countries have submitted the NDCs. And these NDCs, they need to be updated, because when we submitted it, it was in 2015. Today we are 2023. Things have changed. I think we need to update our NDCs. Maybe we have more demand in climate action than when we had the situation was in 2015. The summit will be attended by African leaders alongside all the global leaders and other relevant stakeholders to address climate change challenges and advance sustainable solutions in Africa. The summit will provide a platform to address the intersection of climate change, Africa's development, and the need for increased global investment in climate action, particularly in Africa. It seeks to launch a renewed African ambition for green growth and promote climate finance solutions. Those are the 2 outcomes that we are expecting from this summit. If we want to really assure that we are not polluting the world, we have all the new type of development has to focus on the green growth development. That is the way forward. And promote, and we have to promote also, like we're saying, the climate finance solution. Because what is the essence of having all these tools and you are not implementing it? You just put it on the shelf of your office. No, it has to be implemented, because otherwise we are not doing anything. We are just here like babies, people that don't have ambition. So this is why those are the 2 key outcomes that is coming from here. because that we have all that priority we know, because we have our African group of negotiators. They negotiate with our partners, and the COP during COP 27 in Sharm el Sheikh, we got this we got to table the issue of lost and damage. So this is very good. So we are trying to, because that one is a conversation with our partners. So, but what we really want now is these two areas: the green growth and also the climate agenda, the climate finance plan. The African sorry, the expected output, I've already said that. So I say African Union member states and partners are invited to champion the green growth agenda and the climate finance plan. Presents transformative partnership opportunity and attracts new finance and investment. The summit's output will serve both Africa's and the world's ambition for climate action, focusing on 5 core growth drivers, including which are just energy transition, renewable energy. Key priority encompass expanding electricity access, ensuring clean cooking availability, enhancing energy efficiency, and exploring renewable energy possibility. This is very important. In Africa, 70% of our population are rural, and in rural area there is no electricity. There is no electricity. How can you combat or tackle migration? Because all these youths, they will come either here at the urban, or they go and die in the Mediterranean. So this is very important for us. We need a clear program on rural electrification. It's very important. We are talking of new technology. We are talking of agriculture, digital agriculture. You do digital agriculture if you don't have lights. With digital are we doing? So we cannot just copy initiative like these awards. Today is climate change, everybody is climate change. Tomorrow is Ukrainian, everybody is Ukrainian. No. We have to see what is happening in our continent and correct it. That is what we should do as all of us, because this one, all of us, we have to go together. Leave no one behind, because this continent, we need really to move ourselves from this. We remember Asia, these Sri Lanka, they were very poor countries. Where are they today? So nothing is impossible. I believe that if there is political will, if there is determination, we can go together and we can achieve, because we are very rich. The future is in Africa. All these minerals, all this is here. That's why the coup d'etats are coming, because we have a lot of potential. So we should not encourage coup d'etats, but we are very rich. If we are poor, nobody will come and do coup d'etat. Yeah. So the second one is green minerals and manufacturing. We have a lot of minerals on our continent. These are minerals that are key to Africa's transition of low carbon and circular economy. The summit will aim to emphasize the immense potentiality of green minerals and the sustainable manufacturing. We need to create jobs for our youth. And those are the areas where the youth can have an opportunity to have a job instead of them to go to Mediterranean to go and put their body there. The third one is a sustainable culture, land and water and ocean use. Some of the priorities here include recognition of agriculture as a pivotal driver of Africa's green growth, broad political and financial support for sustainable agriculture initiative, showcasing validated agricultural innovation for investors' engagement. I think there's a lot of side events on all this thematic that is going on since yesterday. I think it started yesterday because we have the Climate Week. There are a lot of side events, so there's a lot of information. There's a lot of initiative that Africa has in terms of addressing these issues of agriculture. Sustainable infrastructure and urbanization. The section will delve into the significance of investing in public transport infrastructure, focusing practical options such as bus rapid transit system, and e-mobile solutions, and resilience and clean cities. 5. Natural capital. This section aims to highlight Africa's unique position as a biodiversity rich continent. We had the COP15 in Montreal last December, and we really say that we should preserve our biodiversity because we have a lot of problem with biodiversity loss, and we want to preserve it because this is our core for the development of any type of a transformation on the continent. Uh, Accounting for a quarter of global biodiversity and processing vast natural capital, promoting conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity for sustainable development. Also, to be discussed, we also during these 3 days, we are going to discuss issues of adaptation, resilient to agricultural risk, and carbon finance. Adaptation, we always say that this is our priority in Africa. We need to adapt. They are not that there are calamities elsewhere, Japan, every day they have adapted themselves to the situation. This situation will not change, but we need adaptation. We are not saying that we don't need mitigation, but adaptation for us in the continent, it's really a priority. Resilient carbon finance. This is another area that we need to sit as African and discuss this market of carbon finance, because when we see that some countries, developing countries like us, the developing countries like us, the African continent, a ton of carbon is $30 to $50. In Africa, a ton of carbon is $8. Why? We don't understand. Is their carbon better than us? We don't know. We have a Congo Basin, which is the second forest, after Amazonia. It produces a lot of carbon. So let us, that's why I say we should not be always the victims. We should sit with our partners and start calculating how much is this carbon. We have to be bold, because how can carbon for us is $8 for the others, because they know how to bargain. We don't know how to bargain. At times our initiative, it is not ours. It comes from their laboratory to us. We don't do that to them. We don't do our initiative then go to EU say, look, this is the initiative that you have to do. So any initiative has to be African driven, demand driven. It has to be contextualized to our continent. What are the necessity? What do we need? We need roads. We need electricity. We need water. We need all this. Those are the urgent issues. We need hospital. Those are where we have to focus. We should not focus today. They will come escalating. I was in a Chatham House. They called me to go and talk about climate change. They're telling me escalating climate risk. I said, what is this escalating climate risk again? Every time you people have an initiative, and we don't see the output of the next initiative in African continent. My time is it? Is it must? So I say, explain to me what do you mean by this concept of escalating? Because I want an example so that I can this escalating. They say no, like a COVID-19 pandemic started in 1 and came out escalated. I say, oh, thank you very much. Now I understand. I understand this one because of your industrial revolution, you escalated this pollution. So I say, Professor thank you very much. I will really tell my people, my fellow African, I buy in this idea. Very good. Escalating. So we will escalate the pollution you did in Africa. We escalate the fall armyworm that the Brazilian, the Asians brought. I like this. I say, I like this concept. I will buy it in. So we escalate. You people that you promise $100 billion, please escalate, bring it back. So that's what I'm saying. We have to know how to bargain. We have to know how to, bargain. We are not insulting anybody. We are just defending our own right. Any partnership should be a win-win partnership. Give and take, not just take, and have people that know how to talk. We don't have people that know how to bargain. So that's why they are taking us for granted. So therefore, African Climate Summit provides an opportunity for Africa to consolidate its united voice on matters of climate change. We talk in one voice in this continent because all of us were member of African Union. Sustainable development and to mobilize support for the implementation of continental programs and policies such as the African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan. We have this one, is ready. Let us, when we mobilize money, implement this one. The second, which covers all these issues we are talking about, the climate agenda. There are also pre-events such as climate change and development for Africa conference and the youth conference. I think it took place today. So there are a lot of things that is happening, and I believe that at the end of the day, when we go to Dubai, we really have people will know what is our position, what is our needs, which is okay. On behalf of His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, I would like to formally welcome our head of states and government, ministers of foreign affairs, finance, environment, and agriculture, and all African partners who are already in Kenya to attend this very important summit that is starting tomorrow in order to unlock Africa's development potential. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muito obrigada. Muchas gracias. Shukran. Asante sana.
Okay, so that's a very packed keynote address by Her Excellency Josefa Leonel Correa Sacco, African Union Commissioner in charge of Agriculture, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. Key points from what she had to say. So we are not polluters. We are the most vulnerable. We contribute the least to climate change. And it's a conversation that Africa needs to start having now. We suffer from the effects of climate change more than anybody else in the world. So how do we meet halfway? How do we sit on a table and have a conversation about how to resolve this? We cannot be victims. We need to do something to create the Africa we want. We need to have a united voice. As we have the summit tomorrow at the KICC, what is it that Africa is telling the world? What are we bringing to the table? What is the rest of the world bringing to the table? So how do we have a conversation as partners, as equals? Right? That is part of the conversation that will happen tomorrow. We need to look for sustainable solutions. And she mentioned the youth. The young people have been having the summit at KICC. They've been represented here. One of them will be in the panel that we're about to have right now. And yes, there's a lot of jobs in green economy. If you look at it holistically, we can change the lives of thousands, if not millions, in this continent. Do we have the goodwill? Are we willing to take that path? So what are we looking for as Africa? We're looking for a win-win partnership. So allow me now to have a panel conversation. I'll introduce my panelists as I call them in no particular order. I would request that they come to the front here. Then we can have that conversation. So in no particular order, allow me to introduce the youngest member in this panel. She was part of the group that organized the Youth Summit at KCC, Anita Soina. She's a climate change activist. Round of applause, please. Climate change activist. A climate justice advocate from the Maasai community here in Kenya. The youngest person. She actually ran for parliamentary seat in 2002. We'll give you a push in 2027, right? She's a champion of environmental causes, and she's the author of Green War and the founder of Spice Warriors, a group that advocates for climate change in Kenya. Next, we have Ms. Sarah Maka. She is One Campaign Africa Executive Director. Round of applause, please. So she'd previously led One Work in Africa's largest market, that is Nigeria. Prior to joining One, Sarah worked in Afghanistan, United States, and Nigeria, providing solutions for the public and social sectors. Up next, we have Dr. John Asafu Ajay, Senior Fellow at Africa Center for Economic Transformation. Round of applause for him as well. Tasked He starts with leading research work under the Economic Management and Governance Program. He has an extensive track record in research and consultancy on agriculture, environmental, and economic development issues. If you look at the poster that we sent out, it was earlier on the board, we were expecting to have Professor Carlos Lopez, chairman of the board and Africa Climate Foundation. Unfortunately, he isn't well. He was not able to travel to Kenya. However, he has sent Miss Kelly Easton, who's the communication strategist. Round of applause for her. She oversees the organization's communication related activities since the inception of the organization, and she's part of the team that organized this press briefing for us today. So yeah, these are the individuals we'll have this panel conversation with in about an hour or so, and talk about what do we expect in this summit that begins tomorrow. We have 3 days. What are we putting on the table? I think I forgot to mention my name. Sorry. My name is Linda Ogutu, the moderator for this panel discussion. Oh, thank you. So Her Excellency, let me begin this panel conversation by focusing on the youth. And Her Excellency at the inception, during her speech, she touched on the youth. And she said that the youth are key in this conversation. They have the largest number in Africa, and we cannot have this conversation without them. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said the solution lies with the youth. So Anita, you had the Youth Summit at KCC for the last couple of days. What is this that came out of this conversation that you had with fellow youth at KCC? Can I have another microphone, please?
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to One Campaign for having me here today. So one thing that stood out today is the fact that from the opening, the president promised to support the young people and even the outcomes of the African Youth Climate Assembly. And he came back today to actually have a Q&A session with the young people together with the president of Africa Development Bank, where we presented, this is African Youth Climate Assembly Nairobi Declaration that has its own requests as well. And the president promised to carry on this declaration to the AU. And for us, that was really meaningful, considering that we had to put up an assembly that consists of young people from the African continent, West, South, North, East, Central, and having them come, having national consultations and regional consultations for all those over 5 months, and seeing that the outcomes of our work has really been is going to be adopted in the declaration is really great for us. It's meaningful engagement that we are fighting for as young people. It means that we are not statistics, that we are in a room to fill a room, or we are in a place to tick a box that, you know, we had the youth, but we are meaningfully included. So for me, that is, I'm looking at it as the first step towards meaningful youth engagement.
Tell me, you're not in a room to tick the boxes, but what is actually, from where you sit, is the role of the youth in addressing the effects of climate?
I could just start by simply using the basic examples that we see. Youth are innovators. Most of the innovations that we see around the world are coming from young people. So that means youth are providing solutions. They could be locally, providing solutions locally, but then to global climate issues. Youth are policymakers. Youths, if you look, we also form the large part of the continent. So that means then we have the stake. Exactly.
How do we bring you into this conversation? A good number of you do not even look like they're interested. How do we bring you as part of this conversation? How do we bring you in?
So when you look at the conversation has been changing over time. Even when I joined the space, I haven't studied any course related to climate. I studied communications, but then I've been passionate about environment. And when I joined the space, when I look at that time versus now, things are changing. The effects of climate change are now forcing so many people then to be in the space. That is
Including the
one.
youth.
Yes, and two people. Second can be how then can we make this conversation use simple language, fun language that young people can relate to. Now that, yes, so most young people want to see fun, and I really like, I love that one campaign has a TikTok account, for example. So they are able to reach to those other young people who are in those platforms. So then we have to make sure that the messages that we are using are messages that can young people can easily relate to, and then we also need to show them that we also care about you being in this space. Yeah.
This Her Excellency is here. A youthful conversation, a youthful language that they can be part of. Soinda, thank you. So we've looked at the youth, who are the biggest number in the African continent. But I want us to talk about the narrative that we now must put on the table as Africa. And that is why Dr. John Asafo Ajay comes in. Dr. John, what is this narrative that Africa now needs to put on the table, even as the summit begins tomorrow?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to One for inviting ASET to be part of this conversation. So, in the past few COPs, Africa has been making a strong case, always asking for money, which we truly deserve. But we think that probably a better way to go about it is to change the message to a positive one, showcase the opportunities on the continent, and make a business case that there are profits to be made here, to be able to get investment with. And not just from outside, but also within Africa. Because within Africa, the participation of the private sector in the climate space has been very minimal. One estimate has that it's about 14% of the investment from private sector. So even within Africa itself, there's a great potential to harness finance, not just from outside. And so the narrative is really to show the opportunities for jobs, for profits, and also to reduce climate emissions, which will help us to meet our targets. And I think that message is probably more convincing than the one where we're always saying, "Oh, we are the victims, and so you should bring the money."
We're basically saying we're not a charity.
But it's not that it's not true. It is true. But we don't want to rest on that.
Okay. So if you're sitting on a table, COP28, and people are having a conversation about the resources in Africa, and someone tells you, so what is Africa bringing to the table? What will you say?
Right. So I just have a few statistics. So, for example, at the moment, Africa holds 60% of the world's best solar resources. Holds about 39 to 40% of global renewable energy potential. It has 70% of the world's cobalt, which the honorable minister said we have, which will contribute to development of storage, batteries, and so forth. And so there's a whole manufacturing capacity in Africa. But these resources are actually scattered across various countries. So then the question really is that how do we harness this? And I think the key there is to have regional collaboration, so that instead of each country going their own way, we should come together to harness these resources and set up regional centers for manufacturing panels and manufacturing batteries and so forth, where, because we do have the resources. What we don't have is the technological know-how.
And the finances.
And the finance.
Okay.
But we don't have everything. But that's why we are calling for partnerships, for people to join, so that we can exploit these resources together.
So you're sitting on a table and you're saying, these are the resources we have, this is the finances that you can bring in. How do you marry the two?
Exactly. So obviously, generally there's a risk. I mean, there's a perception, which may or may not be true, that Africa is a risky place to do business. There might be some justification because we have issues, governance issues in many countries. We have challenges with infrastructure. We have challenges with the institutional setup. The frameworks are not as good as they can be. There's inefficiency in the public and private sectors. There's a problem of corruption, which we cannot deny. So we have to put our house in order as well. So so it's really two ways. And we have to look at these things and make sure that we address them. We have to improve the enabling environment. We have to make it easy for people to do business on the continent. Some countries have done better than others. If you look at some of the data we have, I mean, the World Bank has stopped publishing the doing business due to due to various issues. But if you look at the progress, some countries have done well, whilst some countries have also gone backwards. So things to do with the rule of law, institutions, things to do with ownership of land tenure is very insecure in many countries. In many countries, rural land does not have title. So these are things that we need to work on to make sure that it's easy for both domestic and foreign investors to come and set up businesses here.
So that's that narrative we absolutely must have as Africa. But Sarah, what's at stake, do you think, we do not embrace this narrative?
Well, Dr. John laid out all the benefits. And Linda, when you started, you said what is important about the summit is 1.4 billion people. I would argue what is important about the summit is 8.x billion people in the world. Because unlike perhaps a challenge that is sequestered to one nation, climate is not. So if Africa has the ability, based on its natural resources, as Dr. John has outlined, based on its youthful, innovative population, 750 million young people will come into the workforce by 2050, based on its renewable energy, as Dr. John also mentioned, based on the natural asset. Her Excellency mentioned how our mangroves and our forests, we have 17% of forestry in the world, can capture more carbon than the Amazon. If all of that is deployed and married with capital, what is at stake is helping the rest of the world deal with our goal of 1.5 degrees. So this is not a situation where it's good for Africa, it's for Africa, Africa needs to, work on it. It's everyone, we're in this together. So that's what's at stake. And quite frankly, during the pandemic, the world didn't recognize that we're all in this together. So I'm hoping that as we see the effect of climate, not just on the continent, but in other parts of the world, we can truly come together on this table to bring what Africa has to offer, which is enormous, with what the rest of the global community has to offer in capital, in technological know-how, so that together we actually solve our challenge that is impending. That's what is at stake.
Okay. So Ina, is that a conversation you had during the youth summit? Change of narrative, perhaps?
Yes. So the conversation we had is that around that, yes, we agree that I love that he was able to speak to it. That as much as we are moving away from that narrative of victims, it does not mean we are not victims. Yes, we are victims, but then look, we are also in the forefront of providing solutions. And like I said before, we could be providing solutions locally, but then it is to global challenges. And also through the summit, you are able to have diaspora engagements. And at this this is an African Youth Climate Assembly, but then we had diaspora engagements because we also have our Africans in different areas. And that aside, it's still like we say every other time that Africa contributes about 3%, less than 4%. But then if that does not affect us, then if it affects us, then it means also our solutions are then important to every part of the world as well, just like the effects are affecting all of us.
Kelly, you want to add something on the narrative that we perhaps need to change?
Thank you, Linda, and good afternoon. I think just very quickly, I'd like to introduce the African Climate Foundation as the first African-led strategic grant maker. And more importantly, I think our narrative is one that is not simply, that climate change at least is not simply an issue of environmental vulnerability, but an integral part of Africa's development agenda. So for us, the forthcoming summit, we really do look forward to proposals and solutions that harness Africa's immense potential.
Okay. So Kelly, let me bring you into this conversation and just pick your mind on green economy. What is this crucial thing that we need to focus on when we talk about green economy? Because that's one of the solutions that Africa needs to focus on now. And it's a matter of urgency now for Africa.
So Africa's green future must not be in the margins. It is important to focus on future growth, by mainstreaming green opportunities. And I think the plan should be to develop strategies to attract climate smart and sustainable investments.
Okay, let's see how that goes, how the summit takes it tomorrow. If you're to speak to a holistic approach on climate resilience for Africa, what would that be?
All hands on deck. I think beyond governments, and apologies for reading, but I'm doing this for factual reasons. Beyond governments, all sectors of society, including the private sector, philanthropies, civil society, and local and indigenous communities, have an integral role to play in delivering on climate and development objectives. For us, greater collaboration within the ecosystem of stakeholders will be needed to support policy engagement, mobilize the capacity of non-state actors, and channel sufficient resources towards social, economic, and climate resilience. I think to this end, the ACF really embraces a summit that advances new equitable partnerships.
Mm. Listen, Africa is endowed with abundant natural resources, specifically lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, copper, rare earth minerals, and they're all key components of e-mobility transition and represents new market opportunities for zero targets, as well as sustaining livelihoods. Dr. John, talk to me about green economy and its context for Africa, if you may.
Right. So let me maybe just for the benefit of people who are not technically oriented, what is the green economy? It's basically using environmentally friendly production processes, using things such as the circular economy, which minimizes waste and recycles inputs, and it also includes basically reducing environmental pollution through both production and consumption. So it's quite broad in the sense that it captures a lot of areas of the economy. Obviously, energy is a major input into production. So when we talk about green economy, we are actually emphasizing the use of renewable energy, which is zero emissions based. But it also includes things like water management, sustainable land management, green infrastructure, green cities. It includes things like even water management as well. So when we talk about the green economy, it's actually it's a pathway to achieving inclusive and sustainable development. So we've known about sustainable development for a long time, but the way to achieve it is by pursuing a green economy.
Is that the solutions to
Right.
the effects of climate change?
Exactly. Because the whole idea is to minimize emissions
Okay.
and to reduce pollution, plastic pollution, waste pollution. So it tackles all the issues of associated with environmental degradation.
Can Africa go into green economy, and what does that take?
Right. There are a few barriers because it's not. How do I put it? There's a cost involved, right?
Yes,
One
yes.
is the finance, right? Because you need to change processes, you need to bring in the infrastructure, you need to bring in the machinery, to change production processes. So it's quite costly. In Africa, we also lack technical expertise. So you need the know-how to actually, the technical expertise from the local labor force to apply all these techniques and principles, which is lacking at the moment. There's also weak regulatory frameworks, which do not benefit the working of the green economy. So these are things that we need to address. But having said that, I would like to say that the solution about finance does not always lie externally. So within Africa, we can actually attract the private sector, which has not been participating in the space. But to do so, we need to put in, like I spoke about, improving the enabling environment to make it easy for private sector to invest. But we also need policies and instruments to address the finance issues. And some countries like South Africa have set up green fund, right? Other countries can do the same. And we can also encourage green bonds, green loans from local development finance institutions, national development banks can sort of introduce these new innovations. which can make finance available to the private sector to go into the green economy.
Yeah, actually, Namibia, Zambia, Mauritius are in the process of doing all that. we're
Right,
talking about.
right. So
They
they
are-
are taking the lead.
Yes. Sarah, you work with One Campaign, and I'd like to know from you, what is this role that the private sector can play in this conversation that we're having today?
So I think one of the takeaways from the summit, and you heard Her Excellency mention it at the beginning, is capital, 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 investments, investments. We can have the political will, which we do. We can have the policies, which we do. We can have the youth sort of energy and innovation, which we do. But we need to marry it with the capital and the investments, which will take a variety of sources. So private sector, the African private sector will be really important to that. But in addition to the private sector, we also need the multilateral development banks. And the Songwe Stern Batcher report mentioned that low-income countries need $2.4 trillion every year for the next few years. Now, $2.4 trillion is an enormous, huge number to just wrap your mind around. But what we're saying is we have solutions. So the G20, the group of 20 of which South Africa is a part of, went together and there were experts that said, for us to get all this capital infusion to address climate change for low-income countries, we need to triple the balance sheet of multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, the African Development Bank. And in fact, on your seats, we have a report out that speaks to this directly. But if the World Bank, the African Development Bank can do their part to provide us cheap capital, because that's a problem. It's not just the availability of a capital, it's also the cost of capital, because the more African countries go to the capital markets, which we've been doing to go borrow money, we're paying 5 times more than if we got better cost of capital from multilateral development banks. So the mix of capital becomes really important for our development. And it feels like we're having a finance conversation, but what we're having is a development conversation. So where are countries like a home getting the resources to do all this development we've been talking about? So there is a role for private sector, absolutely. There's a role for foreign direct investment. There's a role for domestic African private sector. I can't underestimate that, underline that enough. Because sometimes when we think private sector, we automatically go FDI. But where's the African private sector fund? How are we encouraging that infusion into our conversation? And then where are the multilateral development banks? So there's an urgency to this. And if I can add one more thing, the current situation, we had a meeting with Her Excellency before now, and she was mentioning the world has changed. The world in which we started maybe even 3 years ago is completely different. So countries are now struggling with debt. What debt means is it allows you less resources to do all the other things we've been talking about in the room for all these minutes. So we really do need to address debt. And to address debt, we need to, because debt becomes a risk to this narrative change we're talking about, to this bright Africa we're talking about, to this, the realm of possibilities we're talking about. We can't achieve that realm of possibilities without resources. And if countries are struggling with, do I pay my Eurobond coupon interest rate, or do I pay my nurses? Do I pay my Eurobond or my capital market loans, or do I pay my teachers? That's what countries are struggling with. If they're struggling with this, there's no way they're going to think about all the investments we need for rural electrification and all the other climate projects that we're looking at. So where the money comes from matters. That there is money matters, and the cost of that resource, capital and investment also matters.
So from where you sit, Sarah, what has crippled Africa's ability to be able to deal with it? Finance is one, let's start.
Sure, finance is one, and we talked about that at length. So right now, the current debt crisis is challenging, and that needs to be resolved. And the good news is we have solutions, but we need action. We need urgent action. And I loved Her Excellency said, we don't need any more studies, we need action. We're here for action. Yeah. We need the G20 to move to ensure that the multilateral development banks can move both in how they provide the loans to match a country's need and how much of concessional resources we have to do all these things. So number one is capital. One of the statistics that came out, and I'm really grateful for the African Climate Foundation to be here, is Africans citizenry knew less about climate a few years ago than European citizenry or North American citizenry. And the African Climate Foundation comes with expertise. And I love what you said, Anita, that things have changed. So yes, it was a hindrance in the past, but we're seeing a greater awareness because livelihoods are being affected. Agriculture is being impacted. We're seeing the effect of climate change. So I know that the polity is understanding that we need to address this. A few years ago, I've said political will, but that's not a challenge anymore. We are seeing with this summit that there is political will from our African leaders. Y'all, Linda is giving me the eye. I'm not sure why she's giving me the eye, to be honest, because this summit is an embodiment of is a narrative on political will. Is it enough? We can argue that, but is there will? Absolutely. Listen, we have to understand that for Africa's superpowers consensus, for the AU to co-host with Kenya, to having this conversation is huge. Yeah. So there's political will in pockets. Now, the third part of, or the fourth part of that would be accountability from us. Because it's one thing to have the great political will and the policies in place. At the end of the summit and by COP28, we should see some good investment with some legs to it. Not like the promises we got on 100 billion that have never shown up, but real investment that are on the ground. After that, we need accountability to make sure my government is ensuring that it's doing exactly what it said it was doing, and her government is doing exactly what it said it was doing. So the accountability will help catalyze this movement.
What's Africa's role in all this?
Who's
Africa?
I think that we are the purveyors of solutions. I mean, for the first time in my political awakeness, we're driving this narrative and this conversation with solutions. Yes, we are victimizing this, but after a while, that narrative gets old. At some point, we're picking ourselves by the bootstraps and we're saying, this is what we have to offer. And I'm really excited because whether it's the critical green minerals, is the abundance of renewable energy. We talked about solar, geothermal, we didn't talk about, wind energy, we haven't talked about, and Africa can harness this in a lot more scale than any other country, or our youth population, or our natural assets. If Africa gets this right, the rest of the world gets this right.
If we get it right, the rest of the world gets it right. Dr. John, from where you sit, what is this one thing that you think stands in the way of Africa working on the solutions to effects of climate change?
Right. So I think the biggest one is countries trying to do things on their own. So I think there's collaboration. And, you know, because we do have the resources, as we started with. We have the human capital, although the human capital needs to develop skills, right? So that's something that we want to work on. And our institutions probably also need to be strengthened. So when I talk about institutions, I'm talking about the regulations, the laws, things that make business thrive. And we need to strengthen that as well. And if you look at various indexes that have been published, Africa ranks quite low in some of these areas. And so we need to put our houses in order, and that we should give it a high priority, because we want to do that very quickly to be able to attract both domestic and foreign investors.
So, when you had the youth conversation, you must have talked about the solutions. And from the youth perspective, what is this thing that is standing in the way of the solution that you came up with?
So first of all, when it comes to political goodwill that was being discussed, I'm not really sure if we really have. We have political goodwill, but then I just realized that in the summits there is no full inclusivity or inclusion of the parliamentarians network from across Africa, which to me that really does not sit well with me.
Sarah, you now see why I was giving you the side eye?
Yes, I got a chance to attend the parliamentarians pre-summit, and some of their concerns, even to the Africa Climate Summit Secretariat, was where do we sit? They are the people who will allocate budgets, for example. We are talking about finances. How will the finance trickle down to the local people and even to the local innovations and to the grassroots. So for me, I will still say that is one of the challenges that we have. And secondly, I'll say is that as a continent and accountability, how can our leaders account for even the finances that they're able to receive? Because I know the conversation is, yes, we need the finances, but we are really having a challenge to understand how they account for the same. So yes, we do keep leaders accountable. We try our best to ask, but then do we really get those answers? Where is the intentionality? Where is the genuineness in addressing these climate change effects, especially when you're talking about adaptation and even the most affected people? Another thing I'll say is we really lack a community approach. How are we engaging the communities?
Yeah.
I got a chance to visit the Mara, for example, last month, and we just realized that there's a lot of indigenous knowledge that the people in the Mara conservancies around are using to even for restoration purposes. Like, we are talking about, we need to plant, let's say, 15 billion trees. So I see bare land and I want to just plant trees because it needs trees. But the people in the community there are saying, we are trying to reintroduce even the species that we've lost before, that yes, this is a savanna grassland that we just need to leave it as it is. So I feel like we really miss a lot on engaging the community and asking them, where does it, where are you feeling the burden? Not just coming with information. And I like that Her Excellency mentioned, coming with information, seated somewhere, coming up with information and going down to the people and doing that for them, instead of sitting down with them and then understanding where the challenge is. Yeah.
Okay, and Sarah, this would be a perfect opportunity for you to introduce the interest rate paper. Would you tell us what it's all about, why it's important for Africa?
Sure. I think folks
everyone
have
has a copy.
they should be on your seats, or someone will hand it to you. One of the things that my colleagues and I at One have thought long and hard about is this issue of investments and capital, and how to get capital into countries. And what we found is that African countries are paying 5 times more than other countries when we go to the capital markets to borrow loans. So just imagine that you have a mortgage and you pay 5 times more, 500% interest rate than your neighbor, because of where you went to get your resources. Meanwhile, there's a provision through multilateral banks that can give up to, in some cases, 1.14%. Obviously, it's based on a country, but they give concessional funding. Or you can even go through IDA, which is the International Development Association, through the World Bank, and get under 1% interest rate on loans for country development. So African countries can get more opportunities to get lower cost of capital by ensuring that our multilateral development banks, the World Bank, African Development Bank, provide more resources for countries, low and middle income countries. Now, what's hindering their provision? In many ways, shareholders of the banks need to add more resources so that it can leverage more capital for countries to get these loans. In some ways, the World Bank and the multilateral development banks protect their credit rating agencies. But we know that a group of experts that the G20 have asked to look into this have said there is a way to protect your AAA rated status while tripling availability of resources to countries at concessional rates. There is a sense of urgency to this. It feels like we start talking about numbers and people might decide that, it's a boring topic, but it's the difference, as I mentioned earlier, between paying for teachers, paying for healthcare workers or not. A country like mine, Nigeria, used 91% of its revenue to service its debt in 2021. What that means is there's 9% left to do all the things for 200 million people that you're supposed to do in a year. It's an impossible way to run an economy. So it's really important, not just that African countries have access to concessional funding, but that they are able to use those resources to do all the things we're talking about. Okay. One thing I'll add, Linda, is some people ask, but why are African countries in such debt distress? When you look at the statistics, we actually take less debt than other countries like Europe and America. African countries actually take less debt, but the cost of our
The cost of
debts
the debt
is
yeah.
higher.
Okay. I need to start wrapping this up, but the summit begins tomorrow at the KICC here in Nairobi. I'd like to hear from all of you. What are these resolutions that you hope to hear from the summit? Let me start with you, Kelly. What do you hope to hear tomorrow as the summit begins?
The African response to climate change must be uniquely African. And I think that for us is very important for this week's summit.
Perfect. So,
I really love that she spoke to what I wanted to say, that we need to focus on Afrocentric solutions, and not just depend on Eurocentric ideas that may not work for us. And to also that since the two presidents who were in our event today spoke about the Green Bank for Africa,
yes.
I would really love to see that come to action.
Yeah, we'd love to hear more about green economy and how we can move forward. Okay, Sarah, I know you'll touch on financing.
Yes, but I will not touch on finances, but
collaborations, partnerships.
Africa's superpower is her common voice. There are 55 countries in the AU, as Her Excellency says. To the extent that we can come as one voice, there's 1.4 billion people in Africa. There's 1.4 billion people in China. There's 1.4 billion in India. So 55 countries, 1.4 billion. One country, 1.4 billion. Another one country, 1.4 billion. So when we speak as each country, it doesn't pack as much of a punch when we speak as a united front. So coming out of this, I would like us to speak as a united front on critical minerals, ensuring this value addition on the continent for jobs. Speak as a united front in advance of COP28. So when we get to COP28, we bring something back home to our people as opposed to just talk.
Yes, thanks. So I would like Africa to highlight the opportunities that exist, because I think we haven't actually spoken much about this, and the rest of the world needs to know, and including even the youth and the resources, and we have to make the outside world know that the future is Africa, so that they can start taking us seriously.
Okay, that would be an interesting conversation that everyone is looking forward to tomorrow as the summit begins at the KICC. Of course, led by Kenya's President William Ruto. So people are looking for reformed global system, investment focused on adaptation and mitigation, and a seat in G20. Those are some of the suggestions that we've had. One voice, let's bring the opportunities that we have, put them on the table as well. So that's where we end this panel conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. A round of applause for my panelists, please. So at this point, I'd like to take questions from you, my colleagues in the media. Does anybody have a question to any of the panelists? If you do, please raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone. You can ask your question. Anyone with a question? Okay. One, two, three here.
Hi, my name is Wanjira from Every News Network.
Okay.
My question is, we all in this room understand what climate change is, and I just want to know, how are we communicating to the local people? Because it doesn't really make sense for us to sit at KICC, make all the good decisions, but when you go down to the grounds, people don't understand it. When you talk about electric vehicles, people don't understand what that is. They find like it's a competition between the fossil fuel and the electric fuel. So I don't know, how are we communicating that? And is it clear?
There's a hand behind you.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Donc,
Sorry, come again?
sûrement, donc, je vais me en langue française.
He's going to speak in French and I'll interpret. My name is Abdoulaye Sow. I'm from Senegal, and I am here to participate, and I loved the brilliant panel discussion, and I would like to thank the different panelists for their contributions. And the question I have, I don't know if it's a question or a comment or a contribution. It is to speak about what is to be put in place to enable youth to be able to defend climate justice. I believe it is important to start this fight from the bottom and not from the top, because we are going to COP28 in a few months, and I think that it is important to start from the bottom going up, so that our youth and children already have a culture on climate justice as they move forward. We all need to ensure that individuals understand and have this culture on climate justice. Besides this, I also attended at the African Youth Climate Assembly, and I saw the president of Kenya who opened this assembly, and the president of the ADB who spoke about green economy. And I asked myself, are first Africans ready for this green economy? How then can we have these logistics and financial resources in order to move to this green economy and join in the process in full? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I didn't get your name. Could you repeat your name?
He's called Abdoulaye Sow. He's called Abdoulaye Sow.
Final question?
Okay, thank you. My name is. Let me switch off, please. Okay, so my name is Wangeshi Kanyeki from the Standard Media, and thank you for all you have done to keep us in. Hold on. All right, and my question is on the interest rate. And you've talked about Africa getting very high capital cost. Is that what you call it? And my question is this summit going to make funds available not just to countries, but is there anything for individuals? Again, going back to the grassroots, what is the possibility of going down to corporates or SMEs? We have over 80% of businesses in Kenya being run by SMEs. If we don't go to the grassroots and we are only leaving it at the national level, the change in people's lives may be very slow. In terms of what developmental milestones will be actualized in this summit. What I'm hearing are better lending rates to countries. I'm not hearing how it's cascading down to even the SMEs or the individuals. If people need to buy homes, we have in Singapore, we have over 90% of the people owning their homes, but we don't see that in Africa. What are we doing to cascade this affordable capital or patient capital, so to speak, to the SMEs or to the business communities, to the informal sector and to the individuals, even to the middle class, even at least to start somewhere. We currently in Kenya, we have about only 22% of mortgages in the country. It is very low. In a country of over 50 million people.
Okay, well, Wanyeki, thank you very much. I'll begin with the first question. I'll address it to the panelists here. Wanjira was the first person to ask the question, how are we communicating to the local people about climate change? Sarah, would you like to take that?
Thank you. I would love Anita to weigh in as well.
Yeah.
One of the things we're seeing is the changing awareness of climate. And I think that there's going to be some responsibility from all of us in the room, and that's why the media is at the house, to translate what people are feeling every day into the effects of climate change. Because my grandma in the village might not know the term climate change, but she knows that the rains didn't come this year at the same time that the rains came 2 or 3 years ago. She knows that the crops are behaving differently than the crops that her harvesting time a few years ago. So it's not that people don't know about climate change, it's that our language needs to fit their reality. And so that's the work of folks in the room here, the media, the work of organizations like ours, through our young champions who are in the room, who go back into their communities, into the work that the young people are doing. So I think that more needs to be done, but it's not in necessarily using terms like climate change. Climate change for us on the continent means really tactical things, agriculture, floods, those kinds of things. And I dare say that infused into our culture is an ability to, you know, back in the day, they'll say when you harvest beans and corn, you let the land rest and then you plant something else on there. So we have indigenous knowledge about how to mitigate climate change. We don't call it climate change, but there's indigenous knowledge. So how are we pulling those out and showcasing to communities that this is exactly what we're supposed to do? This is what replenishes the earth. This is what helps with, you know, adaptation and in some ways mitigation. But there is a responsibility on our part to break down our language so that we are getting it out to those who are in the communities that climate change is already affecting. But let me pass it on to Anita as well.
Yeah, and Anita, as you respond to that, there's also a question on how do you put in place youth to defend climate justice? That was a question that came from.
Okay, thank you very much. On what is being done to, what am I as an individual who understands what climate change doing to pass the communication to the grassroots people? But just because you spoke about the media, then just to weigh in on sorry. So just to weigh in on the media and looking at, for example, the African media, the media in Africa versus in the outside world, you realize that if I want to engage with issues, maybe I have tuning into international media that they do report about climate issues almost throughout. But the same in, and for example, you'll realize that for example, I can use the Kenyan example during elections, how the elections were being covered. I've engaged journalists who have told me that they cannot cover a story on climate because it does not sell. But then you forget that as journalists, or as all of us, we are the ones who are supposed to pass the information. If we report about these things, then people who watch and people who listen become interested. If we don't and continue to engage in what sells, then that is what people are going to engage. So that is my challenge to the media today, now that you're here. And because that is one of the challenges that we have. And now back to, in the Mara, we asked this one guy that, what have you been feeling? He talked about the drought that was in Kenya, named as the worst drought in 40 years. But when we asked him, do you know why it's happening? He said, we don't know. We just wake up and there are no rains and things are changing. So now that comes back to, how then do we involve our local leaders? Other Senate of Kenya, for example, the convener of the caucus, Senator Moses Kajwang, has been planning to do a project on capacity building legislators from the MCA, the local governments, local county governments to the national governments. Then how can that project be supported so that they can also help us to pass laws, to communicate even to their own people? Yeah.
Well, I think we are, but we need to put in place the structures to be able to scale it up. We also need political champions, leaders, and when I say leaders, I'm not just talking about the political leaders, but we need leaders at all levels, right? From the youth, from the private sector, from public sector, to drive the agenda. You know, it doesn't seem to be at the top of the agenda, but we need to get it at the top of the agenda because it's the only way that countries, for example, are going to meet their NDC is through green economy, is through green industrialization. And as far as I can see, we've got the resources to get us there. But we need to get it at the top of the agenda, and I think that's what's lacking at the moment.
Right. So Abdullahi, with Abdullahi, are we good? Perfect. There's a question that was asked about how do we place the youth to defend climate justice? Anita, you may want to pick that up. We skipped it sort of.
Okay, so first, maybe to us as young people is we need to organize and again be united to speak one voice so that we can really be heard and so that we can present our cases. But then also, I think it will also be good for other panelists because I am also a youth, and I think that could also be my question of how then can we also, yes.
No, I actually can't answer that. I think I'm past that stage in my life.
You know, at the end of the day, our young people are the ones that will lead us through this moment. You talked about the growing awareness. I think we can do more as media and advocates to incentivize knowledge on of climate change and its effect on it. Now, climate justice is interesting because it's saying where's the justice that African countries need for what has happened to us. But I'd like to tilt it to climate forward thinking and solutions because for climate justice, you have to rely on what people are going to do for you, but I want us to rely on what we can do for ourselves and the rest of the world. So I encourage the young people to really be looking at the solutions. There's an upskilling required for this green economy that Africa is going into. That's going to be young people. So how do we incentivize that knowledge through information, through, thank goodness for phones. Universities are on your phone, through studying about what is required, getting those technical ability. So there's a lot that can be done, but I do think that we should think through the solutions and where we can plug into the solutions.
Perfect. Your Excellency, may I pass a question? There's a specific question that was asked, and I think it would be the perfect person to answer it. That question was asked by Kanyeke. She said, we're talking about interest rates, and we've had a lot of conversation about interest rates and the unfair interest rate that Africa now gets when it goes for loans. And she says, we've said Africa is getting very ridiculous interest when it goes for loans, especially to the global bodies. Is this summit that you're going to start having tomorrow going to make funds available? That is one. Number two, why can't we look inward for solutions like going to corporates, going to SMEs, so that we can get the funding that we need?
Thank you very much. I will say that we are going to discuss about it, the interest rate, but I don't think the platform that we're going to, we are here, we solve the problem now. Where we have to talk about it, it's at the appropriate place when I see our ministers of finance attend the meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, the Bretton Woods. That's where this conversation has to be focused. They have to revise, and I'm sure, and the G7 20 or so, they have to revise it, and we are really working very hard to make our voice, and table this thing of the interest rate, because it is not normal, as if this institution we made against us, not for us. So we are also a member of this institution. I think that's what we are going to do. What we are going to, the outcome that is coming from here in terms of finance is just this, our important Nairobi Declaration. From this Nairobi Declaration, we need to implement. We need to implement the Nairobi Declaration, and that's when we can start mobilizing fund, both domestic fund and also international funds.
One final question to you, Your Excellency. Sorry. There's a question that was asked about how do we bring in the youth to defend climate justice? You're from the African Union. Perhaps there's a conversation you have had. We've had that it's the biggest number. The youth are the biggest number in Africa. How do we make them part of this conversation?
we first of all have to make sure that they participate in this event. Like now, the youths are there. We know what is their needs, and then we can start engaging with them. We are also working with some partners in the UN. They really want to start, having youth environment studies. Like training the youth, on this environment issue agenda. So this is very important. That's when we are negotiating, we negotiate about this climate justice, because up to now we haven't tabled it in our conversation. It's still, we are just talking about climate justice, but it's not yet set. But we can prepare our youth to be also part of this discussion during when we are negotiating with the during the COP, the COPs, the COPs. We are in COP 28 now, isn't
28,
it?
yes, in Dubai.
I hope we will not go to COP 100. Cool. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Do you have any more questions? I can see 1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate this forum. It's quite insightful. Yeah, my name is Liz from DW, and my concern is on the policies that are put in place by maybe say AU or the concerned parties. For example, in Kenya, there was a ban on logi for the last 6 years. And one of the main causes of climate change, we can say global warming is part of it. And green cover, which includes trees, plays a big role in bringing down the situation. Now that was lifted in Kenya. Let me talk about Kenya, which is my country. And people can now cut down the trees. Yet we were trying to get to 10% of the cover. So what policies are there so that we don't go through counterproductive situations when we are trying to sort out the situation?
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Moses Gichuho. I am a one campaign champion in East Africa. If there is a concept that has really stuck with me during this pre-summit, Africa, the youth summit, is seeing the clock tick. I think that brought in the reality of what we're talking about. And honestly, I'm seated here and Her Excellency mentioned it. 5 years, how many more COPs do we have to have? These conversations have happened before. The solutions are well known. Distinguished panels, help a fellow youth is their hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is David McNair from One. This isn't a question to the panel. It's actually a question to the members of the media, which is, and maybe an appeal, which is, we know these statistics that African countries are paying 500% what they could for their debt. Next week, the G20 will meet, and for the first time, it is likely that the African Union will be given a seat. So the question is, how can leaders present a concerted voice on this issue in the declaration, and then at their seat at the G20 to address this issue and push for reform? Thank you.
Can we wrap up on the questions? Okay, good one.
Yes, my name is Grace. I'm Mujiza from One Campaign. And my question is just, I have two questions, but one is, every time we're talking about the issue of debt, I'm always worried and I always ask, where were Africans when these policies were being passed? Where were they when the interest rates were being discussed? Were we not in the room? Were we not involved? Did we not know about it? Because now we are discussing it, it's like it's an emergency. We just found out we are paying a lot of money. Save us, right? And also the second question is, what structures do we have in Africa? Yes, we have this great loan that we have not paid, but does our development look like the loans we have borrowed so far?
Because if we borrowed loans to build roads on top of other roads on top of, are they there? So that even as we are saying we need to pay this debt or we need to be excluded from this debt, we're able to see the development. Because even if they scrap off the debt and we still have the same structures, we'll borrow more and we'll still end up the same way. We'll still end up being developing countries. I don't like that name because when will we ever develop? And who gets to mark our marking scheme and say, now you're developed? So yes, those are my two questions. Thank you.
Great. So let's start with Liz's question. There are policies in place. But of late, the Kenyan government, in the last couple of months, the Kenyan government lifted the logging ban, and that raised a lot of concern, not just for Kenyans, but for environmentalists across the region. Dr. John, you want to take that question now? She asked, what policy?
Yeah, I wasn't, because I'm not from Kenya, so I wasn't aware of this.
That's specifically why I've picked you.
but it's a little bit disappointing that the ban should be lifted. I think rather what is needed is really the opportunities, because tree planting is part of is a carbon removal technique, and one possibility of trying to make communities benefit from it is by making sure that we can participate in carbon offset markets. At the moment, the participation of African countries is very minimal. But the figure I have is that it's less than 3% when you talk about the CDM. And if you talk about REDD+, it's probably even less. So these are opportunities that we could actually exploit, by planting trees, reforestation, and as well as planting trees. And we are not actually maximizing that opportunity. So it's very unfortunate that the Kenyan government should take that measure. But I would advocate that we should actually scale up our participation in these carbon markets. In fact, there are some obstacles why we are not doing that. One issue is the issue of land tenure, which I spoke about earlier. We need to be able to put in place robust land tenure systems so that communities can benefit from their forests. We don't have that at the moment. So that's something that we need to work on before we can benefit. But to me, I think it's probably not very positive for this policy, but I hope that it can be reversed.
Okay. Moses asked a question about how many COPs we are going to have and if there is hope. Moses, allow me to hold on to that question. I'll ask Her Excellency to address it as the final person as we leave this room. She's more competent than any of us, I believe, in this room to answer that question. Stephen addressed the question to the media. How can leaders present one voice and push for the financial conversation ahead of COP28? Is that correct, Steve? And G20. Sarah.
Actually, I'd love the media to answer it because it was for the media. So
anyone in the media who wants to take up the question? Anyone? Sarah, you have to take one for the team.
Sure. I mean, I think it's an appeal to the House, to be honest. We have said there's an African proverb that says, not for us without us. As I mentioned earlier, the G20 is the body that is with the responsibility of balancing the global economy. There's only one African country out of 55 on the G20, which means any conversations that happen, if South Africa doesn't, and in negotiating, when you're in a body, you need a bit more weight. So what has happened is that Africa has asked for an AU seat on the G20, which is really important. It's a great start. It's not the end, but it's a very significant beginning. Next week, there'll be a G20 meeting. Actually, many leaders are leaving this meeting to go to the G20 meeting. How do we advocate for Africa's role seat at the G20, for the AU's role at a seat at the G20? And that's a responsibility that we need many, many voices to do. In fact, I believe that we can't leave the job of how many more COPs do we have, or where was Africa in the debt seat, or what's happening in the G20 to people on a panel or to a few of us or the AU. We all have to be advocates because the equation of advocacy is if you raise your voice and you get enough people raising their voice, things happen. So we need more voices. So we hope that you take the challenge and will be timely enough to raise your voice in advance of this meeting next week, that the AU needs a seat at the G20. And the good news is that there's positive sounds from many countries that saying, yes, we want this. But you know, with these things, it's never over till it's over. So let's see it to the finish line. So that's my appeal.
You need to work in the media, by the way, just so we're clear.
My people.
Okay. So I will address the last questions to Her Excellency. Moses posed a very interesting conversation. You want to give her this and give. Okay. So there's an interesting question that came from Moses. And Moses asked, how many COPs are we going to have? The same question you actually referred to. Is there hope for Africa? Is there hope for solutions? Or are we going to keep having COP meetings across the globe with no tangible solution? That is number one. Number two is what Sarah has alluded to. What are the chances and what are the conversations we're having towards having a seat at the G20? Africa surely has earned its place on that table. What are we doing to get Africa to be part of the individuals or the countries that sit in the G20?
Thank you very much. The first question, I asked it too when I was in Sharm el-Sheikh. I did not even say COP 100. I say COP 1000. I asked in a format like this, in a meeting, one panel, and I asked, are we going to go up to COP 1000? And most of us that are in this room, we are not alive anymore. So what are we doing? It's really a concern because these COPs are very, very expensive. And the taxpayers, because the global north, they talk about taxpayers and they respect it, the taxpayers. We, in African Union, our member states, they pay contribution. Those are from the peoples, the tax they get from here. And then we go there to defend this continent. And when we are there, we come with pictures. Is it tourism? Are we doing tourism? I said that in Sharm el-Sheikh. My room was $2,000 a day. $2,000, I stayed for 10 days. It's about $20,000. $20,000, if you take it to a village, you can change the life, You can change the narrative of our poor people in the rural setting, even in the urban. If you give it to the youth, they can do a business, they can do something. So this money, $20,000 for 10 days, just to be there attending this type of meetings, I think we are wasting our time. We are wasting our time. There is a good example of how to boycott at times this type of things, And let me, share it with you. In Africa, there are two countries that are the major producers of cocoa, La Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. So those industrialists, on chocolate, they organized a meeting, and the two big players, they did not go. So those are the type of sign we should start doing. Don't go to COP, because we are not getting anything. We should not go to COP. The country that is organizing COP is getting a lot of money. They are getting a lot of money with the tourism they are doing, but the is not there. We come out with pictures that my teams are here. I become, leave one side event, go to one. No, this is not my job to go to the side event, just to go and talk. And I'm very sincere person. My frank speaking, at times they shocks them. So if that's what they want to hear, they will hear it from me. But I'm not ready for that. I really want, when you call me, tell me, this is what project do you have? How much is it? Let us negotiate. That is, what we are expecting in COP. We are not expecting side event. How many side events we have here?
Perfect.
Thank you. And concerning the seat, yeah, we are working. My colleague from the Department of Economic and Trade is really working on that. They were working on that. In terms of addressing, because there was a question that was asked there, in terms of how can we take these issues, this conversation there in our concerns there, we don't have any problem because we have the structures. African Union has an organ which is CAOS, and this CAOS for this next 2 years is His Excellency Ruto. That is the coordinator or the chair of that CAOS. CAOS is the Committee of Head of State for Climate Change. Okay. So during our conversation, those decisions, see if the colleagues, his colleagues, head of state, accept if they adopt a question, a recommendation. So he can table it in the G7. That's reflecting one voice, is reflecting the African position, so there's no problem.
Okay.
Another one that I wanted, just 1 minute.
It's okay.
About when they were doing all these
Where was
attacks,
Africa?
where was Africa? We're not independent. Thank you.
Okay. Round of applause for my panelists and our keynote speaker. Allow me to end this conversation here. Ladies and gentlemen, very big thank you for making time to be here. And to my panelists as well, I really appreciate your time. So our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Josefa Leonel Correa Sacco, African Union Commissioner in charge of Agriculture, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. Yes, you're a very sincere person, especially when you said we were not independent. Yeah. And we thank you for your time. We really appreciate your contribution to this conversation. A big thank you as well to my panelists, Kelly Easton, Sarah Maka, Dr. John Asafu Ajay, and Miss Anita Soina. Thank you very much for your insights and for being part of this conversation. So this briefing ends at this point. However, my panelists will hang on for a while and take a few questions from you. If you want a little bit of clarification from them, they'll hang on for a while. Thank you very much. We may all leave at our pleasure. Have a good evening. Thank you. You need a what?
The mic.
Why?
Oh no, you okay.